The doctor was surprised to see the oligarch who stole his wife from him 5 years ago, his act. Jeremy Urton worked his way through medical school. Earlier, when he graduated and enrolled, he thought he wasn't interested in women. He had one love: medicine. He studied, read literature, and thought about nothing. Hello, students came into the auditorium. Come in. The teacher looked at them. He sat at his desk. His mind was spinning with different thoughts. Now, when he was 40, he began to think about the fact that once he had not started a family. At home alone, it was dreary. And only here, at his institute, he could communicate with young people. It brought him out of his despondency. Jeremy Urton, you're a bit mysterious today. The girl came to his desk. No, I'm fine, he said, as if awake. Then let's start the lecture. She looked at her watch. Yes, of course. He stood up. How many times he had already read and told the students the same thing, but it never bored him. He wanted to convey to the guys that they had chosen a very responsible profession. Have a good day, he told them as they left the classroom. For the second year, Jeremy Urton had been observing a student. Her name was Tiffany. When she first entered and was a freshman, they had never bumped into each other, but in sophomore year he noticed her. She was the most active of the group. When he talked and asked questions, she answered correctly almost every time. Jeremy liked that. He liked people with intelligence. And then Tiffany came to him and asked him to take her for individual lessons. The teacher didn't refuse her. Then I'll come back after class, she said cheerfully. I'll be waiting. The man looked after her. She was young, cheerful and carefree. Jeremy had never paid attention to female students before. If someone had told him that, he would have condemned that person. Jeremy thought it might have been his children. And now he couldn't understand what had happened to him. Here I am, she came to his class. Okay, come on, and he walked down to her. I need clarification. She rummaged through her bag and then looked for the right topic in her notebook. He watched and admired. This girl was something different. She was different from the others. You can't say much in words. You have to go to the library, Jeremy Urton advised. Okay, will you come with me? She didn't do it on purpose, but she seemed to do it in a completely different way. If it's necessary, why not go? He dreaded being around her. I'm counting on you then. She stood up and headed for the exit. Today, 2 years have passed since that moment, and again she is in his classroom. The girl became smarter. She read a lot and always listened attentively. Jeremy Urton, she walked over to the desk. Yes, Tiffany, he wanted to take her hand, but he couldn't let that happen. And come camping with us next time. You know how much fun it is, she invited. Why, it's interesting. For some reason he hadn't thought about it before, although all the teachers are called chaperones at such moments. And then you sit in this classroom all day long, bored perhaps. She smiled. I wouldn't say that, but thanks for the offer. He found it hard to talk to her calmly. He returned home, prepared dinner, sat down at the table. I wonder what Tiffany would make. He looked down at his plate. After that, the man walked to his room, lay down on the couch. He realized that he wasn't meant to be with this girl, because others wouldn't understand such a thing. Jeremy waited. The camping trip never happened this school year. But in the fall, when the next class started, a couple of weeks after the 1st of September, the active students started going camping. Jeremy Urton, remember you promised Caroline, came to him. Yes, he knew when and where they would be going, so he started packing in advance. That's great, you won't regret it. She stepped forward as if she wanted to hug him, but Jeremy recoiled. The girl realized she had done something wrong, blushed and ran to the guys. They were ready to move out. It was going to be a long walk, so everyone was wearing comfortable shoes and the same clothes. Jeremy was walking with the other faculty members. It was the first time he wasn't at home behind the books, in the auditorium with the students. He was hiking. Even as a kid, he hadn't done this kind of thing. Boys and girls often gathered, and he wasn't interested. How did you make up your mind? His colleague and friend Matthew asked him. "I don't know. I got a little bored," Jeremy told him. "You should get married." He laughed. "I've been thinking about it myself," he said, ashamed to say it. Well, finally Matthew clapped him on the shoulder. "Life is unpredictable," Jeremy grinned. "Do you have someone in mind?" I wondered. "I'm looking into it," he trailed off. "Well, I hope I'll be dancing at your wedding soon," he said, happy that it was happening. It was about 20 minutes to the place where they were supposed to stop. It was necessary to pull up the guys to come all together. When they were in the clearing, they began to assign places who would pitch their tents where. There was a lot to do. They weren't just camping. There was a kind of competition. Each group presented its bivouac, cooked porridge, served, and after that the jury gave marks. It was interesting and fun. "Is the work boiling?" Jeremy looked into one of the tents, and he saw Tiffany right away. "Yes, thank you," she turned and gave him a smile. The man walked from bivouac to bivouac, but he was always drawn to the one where the object of his adoration was. "Guys, attention! Listen to the loud voice of the organizer. The performances begin." Immediately, some chaotic movement began. Everyone was trying to finish. "What have you prepared for us?" The jury went to check the results. Someone sang, others danced, told poems. The porridge was almost all excellent. It was over. People were tired but happy. In the evening, we made a big bonfire, around which everyone gathered. "And now I'll announce the results." Matthew stood up. "It's exciting," one of the students said. Almost everyone took some places in different nominations. No one was offended. Who sings? Who plays? Examined the accompanying children. 2 guys came forward. They had guitars. Everyone began to remember and sing songs. "Did you like it here today?" Matthew asked his friend when everyone had left. "Of course, how could I not like it?" he smiled back. "I wish I had done it before." "Yes, it's interesting and fun. Will you go again?" asked the comrade. "If you invite me, I will," Jeremy agreed. He saw out of the corner of his eye that Tiffany and her friends were still sitting around the fire. He wanted to go over, but he couldn't help himself, ashamed. Then Jeremy thought, everyone here is on the same level. Why not share emotions? The man stood up and headed over to where the girls were sitting. "Hello, everyone." He sat down on a log that was lying there. "Hello," they said, though they had already said hello today. "I wanted to ask you, what are your emotions from today?" Jeremy started the conversation. "If there were negative emotions, we wouldn't go like this all the time." Tiffany looked at him. "I really liked it too." He took a stick and started to draw something on the ground. After that, there was silence over the fire. Everyone sat and looked at the red embers. "Shall we go to the river?" Caroline suddenly became lively. "Oh, I don't feel like it. And it's cold there." My friends didn't like the idea. "How about you?" She looked at Jeremy. "I'll go," he agreed, but the next moment he thought it wouldn't be good. But it was too late to change his mind. The girls stood up, and they headed for the bushes, behind which was the river. "Can you give me a hand?" Tiffany held out her hand to Jeremy when they had to get down. "Yes," he hurried to her. When their hands touched, Jeremy's heart quickened. Her skin was so soft. He tried to abstract himself from the situation, but he couldn't. The man himself doesn't know how it happened, but he stumbled and started to fall. Tiffany's hand was in his hand, and the girl flew after him by inertia. "I'm sorry." They were lying on the ground. Jeremy was very embarrassed that he was so clumsy. "I'm sorry." They were lying on the ground. Jeremy was very embarrassed that he was so clumsy. "I'm sorry." They were lying on the ground. Jeremy was very embarrassed that he was so clumsy. It's okay, she was scared at first, but now she was just laughing. Jeremy started to get up. Tiffany was doing the same. They bumped their foreheads hard. "I don't know what's wrong with me." He rubbed the bruised spot. When Jeremy looked up, the girl was sitting very close and rubbing her forehead too. "Can we not go to the river anymore?" she asked. It hurt, but she was still smiling. "Whatever you want," Jer stood up, after helping the girl do it. "Okay, since we've been through so much already," she looked at the water, which was close. "It's a pity it's cold. I'd like to go for a swim," the man said, and he didn't know why he did it. He didn't even know how to swim. "Yeah," she exhaled and shivered. Jeremy took off his sweater and threw it over Natalia's shoulders. "It'll be warmer this way," he stepped back. They made it back without adventure and went back to their tents. "Where were you molesting students?" Matthew asked Jer. "What are you talking about?" The man was afraid he'd seen everything. "I'm just kidding," he laughed. "It's not funny," Jeremy said, getting comfortable in his sleeping bag. "I saw you going to the river with Caroline," Matthew admitted. "And what?" Jared jumped up again. "Nothing. Why are you so tense?" He was up now, too. "Look, Matt," Jared decided to confess everything to his friend so that there would be no accidents. "I like her." "I don't get it." He sat back and stared. "I like Tiffany," the man said more calmly. "What are you talking about? She's a student." Matthew lay back and stared up at the ceiling of the tent. "I know that. That's why I try to stay away," he agreed. "Well, Jer, you've got a problem with women, and now you've chosen a student," Matthew smirked. "I don't know how it could have happened," he said after a long silence. "What do you think?" Matthew wondered. "I'll wait until she graduates, and then everything will depend on her decision," Jeremy said confidently. "Yeah, it's going to take you a long time to do all this," and then the tent was silent, and the friends fell asleep. They returned as usual, all happy and rested. Another year went by. Jeremy watched Tiffany become a high achiever. She practiced, and she was getting good at it. Now when she came in for advice, they could sit and talk for a long time, in a way he hadn't worried about before. "That's it. Graduation is coming up. And then there's adulthood," Tiffany mumbled. "What do you think it will be like?" Jeremy wondered. "Happy," she said dreamily. "I will," he smiled. After this conversation, Jeremy started to think a lot. He wanted to approach her after graduation, tell her how he felt and ask her out. But after what she told him today, he thought that such an age difference might not bring the very happiness she was waiting for. "You ready?" Matthew peeked into his office. It was graduation today at the institute. Yes, now Jeremy was in his suit, which was his dress suit. They went outside, where many people had already gathered. The ceremonial part began. Everyone was congratulated, diplomas were handed out, and words of encouragement were spoken. "Tiffany, can I talk to you?" Jeremy Urton caught up with her. "Yes," she looked back. He decided to talk to her after all, and then let it be what it was. "Can we talk?" he asked. Sure, they sat down on the bench. "I'm going to tell you something now. It may seem wild and stupid, but I have to do it." He was so worried that he was sweating. "Okay," she waited. "I noticed you a long time ago. You stood out from everyone with your intelligence and cleverness. After all these years waiting for this very day," he raised his eyes to the girl. "I am pleased that you say that about me," she blushed. "I know that you were given an allocation. If you want, I can intercede for you in the city hospital." He left his conversation. "Can you do that?" She moved a little forward. "Yes," he calmed down a little, because they started talking about work. "Thank you." She snuggled up to him and hugged him. "You're welcome." He decided that today he wouldn't tell her how he felt, and when she started working, he would ask her out. They broke up. A couple days later, Jeremy called the hospital. The head doctor was a good friend of his. "Hello, Jeremy Urton. What are you doing here?" he asked. "I want to put a smart girl in your place," he told him without any introduction. "Well, if you say a smart girl, then you're welcome," the doctor said without any introduction. "I should have told Caroline." Back then, at graduation, they'd agreed they'd meet. Hello, she saw him from a distance. Sorry I'm late, he looked at his watch. It's okay, she was so young, beautiful, and happy. I made an appointment with the head doctor. They're waiting for you there. He saw a sparkle flicker in her eyes. You have no idea how happy I am. She wanted to hug him again, but stopped herself. Caroline, why don't we go somewhere? He was worried, but he still managed to say it. Yeah, sure. I don't mind, she agreed at first. They came to the restaurant. Jeremy knew yesterday that they would go here, so he took care of everything in advance. Wow, they walked inside. Tiffany they had ordered, and were now waiting for everything to be brought to them. I wanted to talk to you about more than just work. What else? She was ready to listen. I don't know how you'll take what I'm about to tell you, but I have to do it, or I'll die, he said loudly. What are you talking about? She took his hand. I like you, and now that I'm no longer a teacher and you're not my student, I have the right to say it, he exhaled. Remember that time on the hike when you and I fell? She looked puzzled. Yes, he nodded. Then I saw you from a completely different side. At the institute you were a strict teacher, but it turned out that you were just a boy, she laughed. I don't understand. At that moment their order came. I like you too, Tiffany blushed. I don't know how to do it, I've never been, but let's try. This phrase was the hardest for him to say. Okay, she held his hand like that. Then I'll meet you at the same place tomorrow night, she said jubilantly. Jeremy didn't know how he'd done it. Just like that, he'd asked, and she hadn't said no. He and Tiffany began to meet. They talked about medicine all the time. They both loved it. Jer had a closet full of scientific books at home. Can I see that book over there? She showed the man to the top shelf. Sure, he pulled it out, and together they looked at it and read it. I'm interested in you, Tiffany told him. They had been dating for months. Would you move in with me already? He asked her. Family? The girl looked him in the eyes. If you want to, then yes, marry me. He got excited. These words sounded for the first time from his lips. I agree, she was sure of it. The kind of man she'd always dreamed of, not only smart, but he could stand up to her. You have no idea how much happiness you've brought into my life, he hugged her. Jer, I congratulate you, said his friend on the phone when he told him about the upcoming wedding. I congratulate myself, he was proud and happy for himself. Well, you're not getting off that easy, Matthew promised. Sure, Jeremy hung up. The wedding was the usual: restaurant, dress, guests, congratulations, bittersweet. Well, that's it. You're my legal wife now. They were lying in bed. Jer inhaled the smell of her hair. And I'm glad of it, she turned to him. It had been interesting when they were dating, always having to think of something. Now it was routine. They both went to work in the morning and met for dinner in the evening. And when to have fun. I'm so tired at work, I just want to get to bed and go to sleep, Tiffany replied. It's just, I thought you were young. You need it, he worried. No, it's okay, she walked over to him and hugged him. I've got a surprise for you. What kind of surprise? He was puzzled. Here, Tiffany took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. At that moment, something strange happened to Jeremy. Such a feeling of elation, gratitude, and happiness he had never felt before. Natashka, he hugged her. Yes, I just found out yesterday, she stood and pressed herself against him. Jer did not hide this news from anyone. He immediately called his friend and told him. You're the good guys, Matthew told him. Over the weekend, the man invited Tiffany to a movie. After her message, he began to pay more attention to the little things in general. Tiffany felt good about herself. She had a hard time in the last few months, and her husband saw that. It was a good thing she worked at the hospital. They would have gotten help there right away, so Jer wasn't worried. Oh, it hurts. The man woke up in the night from her screams. "Let's go," he frantically started calling an ambulance and packing. Tiffany was pitiful to look at. She wasn't screaming, but you could tell by the look of it the pain she was in. It's okay, Jeremy was next to her. Aya, she moaned. Soon, he wanted to say something else but was asked to leave the room. He couldn't stay indoors, so he went outside and paced back and forth for a long time until a nurse called him. "Congratulations, you have a boy," she smiled. "How's Tiffany doing?" That was what worried him now. "She's doing well. She'll be brought in to feed the baby soon," she explained. Jer turned around the building, wanting to see her. Tiffany. He stood at the window. "It's a boy," the woman told him. "I know," he nodded. He told her he loved her and her son hugged her and would come again soon. After that he went home. He had to go to class. "What, congratulations?" Matthew greeted him. "How did you know?" Jer didn't get it. "Look at you. The bags under your eyes, your hair all over the place, and your shirt's not buttoned right. You've obviously been up all night," Matthew laughed. "Yeah, you got that right." He began to smooth his hair with his hand. "Who?" Matthew waited for an answer. "The boy," Nate the father said proudly. "Well, Caroline, well done." Jeremy shook Matthew's hand. "Yes, she tried. Now everything will be different." The man was sure of it. They went to their classrooms. Jeremy Urton was in the clouds that day. Students asked him something. He nodded and tried to answer, but he couldn't concentrate on his work. He wanted to drive to the hospital to see his family. Tiffany was discharged, and they drove home together. "Would you watch Nate while I go to the bathroom?" Tiffany asked. "Why do you ask?" he wondered. "I don't know, it just kind of came out of the machine." She was happy. Daddy had been reading books to his son since he was born. Rarely was fiction, mostly everything about medicine. "Why are you loading his head so early?" Tiffany couldn't understand. "Let him absorb it. Then it will be stored in the subcortex. It will be easier," her husband assured her. "Maybe he'll want to be a builder." Tiffany didn't mind that her husband read. She just wanted to discuss it. They didn't spend much time on it now. Nate was practically taking up all of it. "Okay, construction worker. That's a good profession too." Jeremy smiled. He'd thought many times what a blessing it was to have a family, a wife, a child, and why he'd given it up before. It was a pity for the lost time, but on the other hand, then he wouldn't have met Tiffany. Nate grew up. He went to kindergarten, then to school. Everywhere the boy showed off his extraordinary knowledge. "Dad, why don't we study this one?" he asked Jeremy for help. Sure, he never said no. Caroline was well regarded at the hospital. She took the toughest cases and never said no to anyone. Jeremy was taking few classes now so he could spend more time with his son. "Is Mom having a hard time?" Nate often asked. "Sure, but she helps people, saves them," his father answered. The boy, as his father expected, was very interested in what was related to his parents. He already in the 7th grade said that he would be a doctor. "How about teaching?" His father wanted to get him on his side. "No, I want to help people, like Mom." "I know what you mean. It's called a calling." Jer hugged him. When the boy graduated from high school, Jeremy Urton was already retired. He was offered to stay on, but he flatly refused. "Son, I congratulate you," he said to Nate. "Our institute is always open to you." "And that's where I'll go." Nate had known it for a long time and aspired. Great. The father was only afraid that his son wouldn't be interested, because he already knew a lot of things. "Tiffany, it seems like you and I were sitting on that bench the other day talking about your job. And now our son is graduating from school." They were waiting for Nate near the institute. "Yes, how quickly time flies," she agreed with him. Jeremy offered his son to go with him, but he flatly refused anyone's help. He wanted to do everything himself, and so he did. Mom, Dad. He came out on the porch waving his papers. You got in? Jer began to ask from afar. Of course, the boy did not doubt his abilities at all. Dynasty. The man hugged his relatives. After that, everyone went to the restaurant. This is where your mom and I talked about us for the first time, Jer started to remember. It's interesting that you have some memorable place. The guy loved his parents. Yeah, there's another one. Tiffany looked at Jeremy slyly. Okay, you'll tell and show me later, the son laughed. He had a lot of preparation to do before he started school. Nate had a lot of responsibility. He himself wanted to perform well. And also the fact that his father was a teacher at this institution. I know you can handle it, Jeremy said confidently. I know it myself. Nate looked ahead and saw himself as a first-class surgeon. Summer was over quickly, and September came, which meant it was time for school. Everyone lived together. It was convenient for the guy. He went to classes and returned in the evening. His father would go over the topics with him, explaining, prompting. Tiffany, when she was at home, was also interested in her son's studies, especially since she was going through it all herself. The boy was already in his 3rd year when the accident happened. He came home and saw his father bent in half, as if he couldn't breathe. Dad, he rushed over to him. Nate dialed his mom's work number, and she sent a car. While they were on their way, the boy gave his father first aid as best he could. Jeremy was put on a stretcher. His son kept up the pace. When they got to the hospital, Tiffany was already there. What happened? She asked Nate. I don't know. He came back from the institute. He suddenly felt sick. The guy was nervous. Jeremy had had a stroke. Tiffany hadn't left his side. She went to the doctor for advice. What should I do? She asked for advice and guidance. No excitement, calm and fresh air, the doctor advised her. Tiffany took hold of her head. She realized that she would have to leave everything behind. But it didn't matter to her, as long as Jer was alive and by her side. Nate, let's go talk, she called to her son. They were sitting in the room. The mother was very sad and loaded. What are you thinking about? He asked her. Most likely, I will leave work, and your father and I will go to the village, she said. And the apartment? Was surprised guy. What about the apartment? You will stay here, Caroline said confidently. Mom, how can it be? He hugged her. Sometimes you have to sacrifice something. She looked at Nate. I understand. It's going to be okay, the son said confidently. Tiffany sat by her husband's bedside all day. He was relieved now, looking at his beloved and feeling resentful that she had to take care of him. No need for sacrifice, he told her. Jer, be quiet. I've already made up my mind. She leaned over and kissed him. Love, he squeezed her hand. It's okay, she stroked his head. A few weeks later, the man was discharged. Tiffany wrote a statement. Everyone persuaded and regretted it. But she insisted. Come back. We'll always be waiting for you, her friend and co-worker told her. Okay, she promised. Tiffany's grandmother had once lived in a village far from their town. She had left her granddaughter the house as an inheritance. She thought she'd never use it and wanted to sell it. But Jeremy talked her out of it. In some years, he and his son had been there, renovating it and everything. It's like the man knew he was the one who was going to live there. Do you remember our cabin? She asked her husband. Of course, he smiled, remembering how nice it was there. That's where we'll go, Tiffany said. What about your job? He couldn't believe she had given up on her dream. People get sick everywhere, his wife mumbled. Okay, but promise me that she didn't let him finish, putting her palm to her mouth. I know everything myself. I promise. It will be fine. She started to pack her suitcases. The car arrived in the evening. Nate helped his mother and father down, hugged them goodbye, and they drove off. Nate had just recently met a girl they had started dating. Rose, like the guy, studied at the same institute. They hit it off by accident. There was lab work and a partner was needed. Rose transferred in from another class, and Nate decided to partner with her. "I'm glad I got in with you," she told him then. "Me too," he smiled at her. They had also, as Jeremy and Caroline had once done, looked at books at the guy's house, discussed. Now Nate thought that Rose could come to live with him, since she lived in the dorms. "So have you thought about my offer?" They met at the institute. "Yes," she nodded affirmatively. "And what is your decision?" He waited, afraid that she would refuse. "I agree," she laughed and hugged him. "Then pack your things, I'll wait, and we'll go to my place," he said. Rose did not resist. She went up to her floor, took the bag she had packed yesterday. She said goodbye to her friends and left the building. "All right, ready?" The guy took the bags from her hands. Yes, she followed him. The girl had been to Nate's apartment many times, so she knew everything here. She went into a room, then looked into another. "Where do you want me to sit?" she asked. "Wherever you want. We have the apartment all to ourselves." He put her bags on the couch. "Well, why don't we redecorate?" Rose asked. "I don't want to change anything." He looked around the room where there was a closet with books. "Okay, then let's do a general cleaning." She was persistent. "Okay, really, it's high time to do it." He was in agreement with her. The young people began to organize their lives. Rose liked that Nate was such a courteous and nice person. "Do you think they will hire us to work in the same hospital?" Rose asked Nate. "I don't know," he shrugged. "Look, you'll definitely get a job there because everyone knows your father and mother there," Rose said angrily. "If I'm there, they'll take you too." He turned to her and kissed her. "I'm so scared," she said. "And what are you afraid of?" the boy asked. "Exams and then work. Now it's only studies, and then everything will be real." She shared her fears. "Don't think about it before the time," Nate advised. Just before graduation, the young people went to see Jeremy and Caroline. They wanted to tell them that they were going to get married. Caroline got a job at the health center. The local people couldn't be happy that a specialist of such a level had come to their village. The woman was always busy. Jeremy spent more and more time in the vegetable garden. He had always dreamed of it, but he had never had the opportunity before, and now he was conducting various experiments. "Dad, hi," shouted Nate from behind the fence. The man flinched. "Oh, really?" he said to him. "How many years? How many winters?" "Yes, we have already missed you very much ourselves." Nate entered the fence. "Mother will be here soon, come on," and Jeremy started up the steps. There were only 3 of them, but the man did it very slowly. Nate watched and felt sorry for his father. "Oh, it's so cozy here," Rose's voice sounded. "Yes, Tiffany really likes this place." The man sat down in a chair. While the son and father were talking, Rose put the kettle on. "Well, son, are you ready for work?" his father asked him. "Of course, I was wondering, if Rose doesn't get the job, will you talk to her?" The son was ashamed to talk about it, but he wanted the girl to be where he was. "Of course, what are you so excited about?" Jeremy touched him. "I just didn't know how to ask," Nate said, embarrassed. Rose had already poured boiling water into the mugs and now stood looking around for tea. "Nate," she called out to the boy. What he looked out of the room. "Where's the tea?" she asked. Now, he disappeared back into the room after asking his father, came back and pointed to the drawer on the wall. The tea was ready and everyone was invited to the table. "Do we have guests?" they heard from the threshold. Mom Nate came out to her. "God, why didn't you warn me?" she cried. "Why are you reacting like that to me today?" The guy came up and hugged the woman. "Honey, how I missed you." The mother pressed against him and continued to cry. "This is Rose," he introduced the girl to the mother. "Nice to meet you, Caroline," she said. "And why are you sitting at an empty table?" The woman started bustling around the kitchen. For now, we'll just drink tea, and then we'll have a party tonight." Nate took her hand. "Okay, I'm just excited." She sat down on a chair. After the first conversation, everyone calmed down a bit and went to the room. "Is Rose studying with you?" Mom asked. "Yes. How did you know that?" The son didn't understand. "And where can you meet another girl if you, like your father, are always at home, in the library at the books?" She laughed. Wow, Nate realized what kind of mother he had. Tiffany called Rose to help her, and Nate was sent to the store, beforehand, making a grocery list. When the boy returned, the kitchen was abuzz with work, and the men went to the vegetable garden, Jeremy eager to show off his new plants to his son. "You found your hobby," Nate smiled. Yes, he sat down on the little chair that stood there and began to show his son how and what he was doing. When the women called them to the table, they were very surprised. There were pies, salads, cutlets, everything. "When did you do all this?" Nate didn't understand. "A long time, skillfully," smiled Mom. The conversation started at the table. "We came here for a reason." The boy looked at his parents. "So put aside the devices, Father. Me and Rose, we want to get married," the son said. "That's great," Caroline chortled. "We didn't want to do it without you," Rose interjected. "No, we're not going to the city." Caroline realized that Jeremy would worry at the wedding. "I'll at least do it in front of you." He got up from the table and walked out into the hallway. "He's all grown up now." His mother winked at his father. "Rose, will you marry me?" He handed her the ring. "Yes," she said one word. "God, children, we congratulate you." Tiffany clapped her hands, and Jeremy shook his son's hand. They stayed a couple more days, and then they had to leave. Work was waiting for them. Nate went to work at the same hospital as his mother, just like he wanted. His father talked, and Rose was hired too. Now they were real doctors who were ready to help people. They decided not to have a wedding. It was a waste of money. "Wake up, sweetheart." Nate woke Rose in the morning. "What? Is it time already?" She jumped up on the bed. "Yes," he smiled. They went out of the house. She was wearing a beautiful light dress. He was wearing the suit he wore at the prom. The receptionist asked if they agreed. After an affirmative answer, the happy couple went outside. "I love you," he kissed her. "And I love you," she rubbed her cheek against his hand. They decided to go and celebrate the occasion at a restaurant. They didn't need anyone. The evening promised to be romantic. After the wedding, their life began. It was mostly in the hospital. Older and experienced doctors were surprised how such a young guy so much can and can do. But remembering who his parents were, they already discarded all guesses. "Nate, the chief calls you." His colleague came up to him. "Well, do you know what he needs?" the man asked. "No," the man answered him. The young man ran up the stairs, and in a minute he was at the office of the chief. He did not worry in the slightest, opened the door and entered. "Did you call?" he asked. "Yes, sit down." The man showed him to a chair. "Listen, we are opening a new children's department. I want to appoint you head there," said the chief physician. "Oh no, I'm fine here." The guy didn't want it to turn out that way. "Okay, then Rose, I trust her as much as I trust you," he asked. "Why don't you talk to her about it?" Nate asked. "Okay, just wanted to suggest, if you don't have anything, you can be free to go." The man let him go. Nate was glad to be trusted, to be offered positions. He decided that he would continue to do the right thing. Rose also refused the position, which she told her husband at home. Working at the hospital took up a lot of time. Young people really wanted children, but Rose could not get pregnant, so they lived. When perestroika broke out in the country, everyone was very surprised. Nate and Rose by that time worked in the hospital for the 10th year. The young man was a success among his colleagues, but whatever he was offered, he refused everything. He was satisfied with the work of a simple surgeon. "I've been promoted," Rose said at home. I know. Nate sat beside his desk. Just yesterday he'd been offered the position, but he hadn't wanted to move. Rose, on the other hand, was grabbing for everything now. She needed the money. That's why there were always arguments in the family. "Why are you so sluggish?" she'd ask her husband. "Tired," he'd say. "And I'm not tired. She started a scandal from the same place." "Don't," Nate said. "Don't what? Don't buy a new dress, boots, fur coat?" she yelled. "You can save up." He didn't understand why she was shouting, because she was also working and bringing in the same amount of money. Yes, Rose had changed a lot in recent years. Jeremy was very sick, and he was already lying down, not getting up at all. Nate felt sorry for him and for his mother, and she followed him around, carrying him. "Mom, maybe you need help?" asked her son when she called him once a week. "What can you do? Drop everything and come here." The woman was very sad. "Yes, that's true," to the son sighed. He had so much on his plate. There was a lot of work to do, problems at home, not enough money. Nate didn't know how to cope with it all. Hello, his wife came to the phone. Nate didn't want to eavesdrop, but it happened involuntarily. She began to speak very quietly and incomprehensibly. "Where are you going?" her husband asked as she started to get ready. "What do you care? Treat your beggar patients," she said sharply. "It's nighttime," he pointed to the window. "I'll manage somehow." Rose opened the door and walked out. Nate was all tense. Where could she go at a time like this? He wasn't a jealous man, so having his wife go to someone else was out of the question. The young man hoped that she would have told him so. Rose was gone until the wee hours of the morning. When she showed up, he was already getting ready for work. "And you, aren't you going?" he asked her. "I'll lie down for a while and then I'll come back." She looked tired. The mystery continued. Nate did not tell anyone what was going on, but he was very worried. The surgeon was working hard. There were so many patients that there weren't enough beds. Sometimes they had to put them right in the corridor. "I've gone," Rose would say again in the evening. He'd go out into the corridor, but there was no one there. Like the last time, she didn't come back until morning. One time, the husband noticed a drop of blood on his wife's coat. "What's that?" He showed her. "I don't know, maybe I got it dirty at the hospital." She was avoiding the answer. "Where did you wear a coat?" He confronted her. "Oh, Nate, why are we talking about this?" She was lying down. A couple months after Rose started leaving the house at night, she wrote a statement of her own at the hospital. "What are you doing?" Nate looked at her. "I know what I'm doing," she said proudly. "Well, look, don't regret what you did." Nate was perplexed. Just then, his mother called him and told him that his father was gone. He'd taken a little vacation and gone to the village. Rose had refused to accompany him. "Why are you alone?" his mother asked him. "Let's not talk about it now." He was already depressed about what had happened. "Well, when you want to, you'll tell me," Caroline agreed. It was sad to see a loved one go. Everyone was mourning Jeremy, and it was bad and sad. "Will you come into town with me?" "You'll go back to work," the son said to his mother. "No, I'll stay here. The local people need me," she said. "Okay, come visit. You can do it now." He said goodbye to his mother. "Nate, are you okay?" the woman asked. "Yeah, why'd you ask?" He didn't understand. "You used to be so cheerful, always talking about work, but now you're not like that." His mother saw through him. He arrived home and Rose wasn't there. He went into the kitchen and made himself some tea. The doors slammed. He expected his wife to come in to see him. What was the husband's surprise when she came in? "Rose, where did you get the coat?" He looked at her. "I earned it." She stood and twisted around, looking at her reflection in the window. "Where do you work that you can afford such a thing?" He was very surprised. "Where you would never go," She went out into the corridor and took off her clothes. After that, there were calls again in the middle of the night. Rose would leave, and then she would have some expensive item. And there was an explanation. One night when Rose was on night duty, a man ran into the hospital. He was looking for someone, but he couldn't make it out. "Hello, who do you want?" Rose came out to see him. "Look, help me, no offense." He did not say hello, but took out of his pocket a wad of money. "What's the matter?" The doctor was alarmed. "Let's go," he called her after him. "I can't, I'm on duty," she was confused. "I'll be right there." He went down the corridor where a young nurse was sitting. "What do you want?" The girl was frightened. When he touched her, she dozed off a bit. "Here," he put the bills in front of her. "Sit a little for her." He led Rose over to the girl. "Rose, where are you going?" The nurse did not understand. "I won't be long," she could not say, for she did not know. "That's it. Let's go." The man grabbed her hand and dragged her behind him. They got into the car, and at high speed they drove somewhere. "Maybe you can explain to me what happened?" She wanted to know the details. "I have a friend dying there," he said without turning around. "All right, a bandit?" Rose shook her head. "Think what you want. Just help me." He tossed her some money on Cristoforuni. "Wait to thank me. I haven't done anything yet." She put the bills on the passenger seat. They arrived at some house, got out of the car. The man was in a big hurry. The entryway was dark. Rose was even a little scared at first. Upstairs, her companion showed her. When they entered the apartment, the girl was very surprised. Everything was like in some expensive hotel. "Where is your dying man?" Rose looked at the man. There, he pointed to the door of the room. She went in and realized everything at once. There was a man lying on the bed. His shirt was covered in blood. "A bullet?" she asked. "Yes," he nodded. "But without tools I can't do anything." She tore his shirt and examined the wound. "What tools do you need?" He shifted from foot to foot. "Scalpel, thread, alcohol, needle, cotton swabs." She listed something else, but there was no one else in the room except her and the wounded man. "Here. Look," he brought a large box from somewhere. "Where did you get this?" Rose opened it and was surprised. "It was left by the last molder," he said carelessly. "Was there anything else left of him?" Her eyebrows went up. "Stop talking and get on with it," he said hurriedly. Rose began to work on the patient. The bullet had traveled past all the vital organs. She quickly took it out, cleaned the wound and sewed it up. Then she dressed the wound. "We have to go to the hospital," she said. "No hospital. Treat him here," practically shouted the comrade of the one who was lying on the couch. "I have done everything that depends on me." She raised her eyes to the man. "Okay, will he live?" he asked. "I cannot know, need an examination," she said, and gathered herself. "Will you come tomorrow?" he asked another question. "If I have to, I'll come." Rose already knew what the patient was missing. She asked him to take her to the hospital and wait there. After that, she went out and gave him shots and pills. "What are these?" He looked at the medicine. "Can you give the injection yourself?" she asked. "Yes," he nodded. "Then inject him with this, and when he comes to, give him a pill. He'll be in a lot of pain. Tomorrow, closer to the evening, come, I'll go with you." She took the money from him and went into the hospital satisfied. That evening, her first call came. Rose was brought in. She did everything, then got the money and left. Almost every day they needed her help. She could only do everything at night. One day there was a very bad case, a stabbing. The girl thought she couldn't handle it, and they'd lose a man. But it was all right. She managed to do the right thing. He woke up. Somehow Joshua came into the room. It was exactly the man who had come running to the hospital then. "Who?" Rose didn't understand. She'd had a few of those men during the week. Caleb, the man said, and nodded at the room. Rose realized it was the one with the gunshot. She went to give him a shot and a pill. "How's your health?" She hadn't come in yet, but she had already started talking. "Did you save me?" he asked in a cocky voice. Be careful with your expressions. She was afraid of such people. "Come here," he took her hand. But as the man's strength was low, Rose pulled her hand out. "What do you think you're doing?" She wanted to get away. "Come on." "I wanted to say thank you," he smiled. "So you're on the mend," she concluded. Caleb was indeed on the mend. Rose visited them when she needed to, but always with Caleb. "What's your name, or is it doctor or model?" he asked her. "Rose," she said. "What's my name, you know? You've heard it." He was already sitting on the couch. "Yes," she confirmed his words. "That's good." He tried to stand up, but it was still difficult to do so. "Are you hungry?" Caleb asked her. I wouldn't say no. She felt that she was really hungry. "We'll go now," he called to Joshua, who understood, helped him up, took him outside, and put him in the car. "You're going in your robe?" Rose looked at him. "What's the big deal? It's my place. I come and go as I please." He waited for them to start. The car drove off, and Rose sat there wondering how she could have gotten into such a company. But she didn't despair. They were paying her such good money that she wouldn't give it up for anything. "Are you still working?" Caleb asked her when they were eating. "Yes," she nodded. "Quit. You help, and I'll pay." He didn't suggest it. He just put conditions on it. "I can't. We are together with my husband." She waved her hands. "It's not a hindrance." Caleb, as if he hadn't eaten in years, he pounced on the food. Even during the conversation, he didn't stop eating. "Okay, I'll think about it." She started eating too. It was after Caleb's words and Rose's thoughts that the hospital's letter of resignation was written. "Dump the poor bastard and move in with me," Caleb began to suggest to her more and more often. "I can't do that to him. We've been through so much together." She glared at him. "I have a house, money, cars, restaurants. You'll be like a cheese and butter." He listed his advantages. "No, I won't do that." She looked down at her feet. "Well, think about it. I hope you make the right choice." He leaned back in his chair, his chest hurting immediately. "Oh," he squeezed his eyes shut. "Does it hurt a lot?" She jumped up to him. Not that he took her by the waist and just looked down at her. "Let go." Rose realized he was faking it. "Okay, for now, yes, but it'll be a while before you're mine," he said confidently. She wasn't interested in home anymore. She saw a whole other life. She wanted to go there, to those men who needed her. Life was beautiful. Fur coats, champagne, restaurants, everything Rose had wanted before. And why, if her husband couldn't afford it, should she put up with him? "Are you home?" Nate came in that evening. Yes, she came out of the room. She was wearing a thin dress, and her husband noticed a bracelet on her wrist. "Where do you get all this stuff?" the husband asked. "I got a good job," she parried. At night, he didn't know what to think. She didn't go to work in the oldest profession. "I don't think you'd understand that." She didn't speak to him again. "Rose, talk to me." Nate came into the room. He wanted clarity. But his wife was gone. She was sitting and looking at some magazine. He put on his shoes, walked out, and slammed the door hard. Nate loved this woman and wanted to spend the rest of his life with only her. What was going on now? Why had she become like this? He sat on a bench in the yard and thought about it all. The front door opened and Rose came out. She was so beautiful, wearing furs and new boots. She couldn't see him because the bench was in the shade. Just then a car pulled up. She got in it, and they drove off. Nate went back to the apartment. He had no energy for anything. He packed up and went to the hospital so he could get his mind off it. "Nate, why are you here? You're not on duty today, are you?" the nurse on duty asked him. "I need to finish something." He lied to her. The whole hospital knew there was trouble in the family. They'd seen how much of a bimbo Rose had become. They knew Nate couldn't afford it, so the conclusion was obvious. Does it hurt? A coworker and part-time friend walked into his lounge room. What are you talking about? Nate got up. About Rose, sat down next to him and gave his friend a cup of tea. Do you know something? He tried to get some information. No, I see what you're doing. You're melting, and she's blooming and smelling. Nate stood up and started walking from side to side. I don't want to say anything about it. He covered his face with his hands. Okay, I won't reopen your wounds. But if you came here, it's bad enough. The friend put his hand on the man's shoulder, stood for a while and went out. Nate was alone again. More than anything, he was afraid that she would come to him and tell him she was leaving. How to get over that pain, he didn't know. In the morning when he woke up, at first he didn't realize where he was. But he remembered what had happened yesterday, washed his face, and went to his workplace. Nate was working, but he wanted to go home so badly. He thought he would miss her. Never got to talk to her. He couldn't wait until evening. He went to the head man, told him he'd be on call at night, and went home. Just as he thought, Rose was home. Hi, he walked up to her. Nate, don't start. She didn't turn around. We need to talk, he pleaded with his wife. There is no more of us. She was putting things away. It was only now that her husband noticed. Are you leaving? He was frightened. Yes, I'm leaving. She turned to him and spoke, looking straight into his eyes. But why? What did you lack? Money? He was almost crying. Suppose she threw something else into her bag. But what about love? He couldn't understand. What love? You're always with those sick people of yours. We had nothing. We just existed. And with Caleb I felt real life, she said very loudly. Don't go, he held her hand. There's nothing you can do to keep me away. She looked at him like she felt sorry for him. Is this it? Is this the end? He asked her. Yes, she nodded. Are you going to his place? He nodded at the window. The car that Rose had driven away in yesterday was parked there. Yes, his name is Caleb and he's very rich. He has everything, the woman said strangely. He doesn't have one thing, a soul. He sold everything for those millions, Nate said angrily. He stood in the hallway, so pathetic it hurt to look at. Rose, I love you, he said. Don't hold it against me, she smiled and walked out of the apartment. Nate went into the kitchen. What he was going to do next, he didn't know. He looked out the window. A man got out of the car, loaded his things into the trunk, and they drove away. Just like that, the woman he loved, the one he had always trusted, left him. Christopher. Hi, he called to his friend. Hello, he answered. Let's go fishing in the village, he asked him. Why, for a couple of days we can, he responded to the request. And now they were already sitting in the train to get to Natalia, Nate's mother. Why did she stay with you there? She's a good specialist. They would have ripped her off here, Nate asked. I don't know. She said there were a lot of people there waiting for her help. Nate shrugged. He didn't want to talk about his mother right now because it brought up his father. All right, let's talk about something else. Christopher realized at once. Tell me, is the lake big there? Yes, Nate nodded. Are there a lot of fish in it? Nate asked the next question. Yes, the neighbor nodded again. Well, why did you take me? To show me that you don't want to talk or do anything with me? He asked the question in a firm voice. I'm sorry. I just feel so bad. I didn't even realize I couldn't distract myself. Nate turned to him. Rose was dropping by Caleb's house at the same time. She was loving everything about it. Yesterday she'd been a simpleton, but now she felt like a queen. Make yourself comfortable, he kissed her. Good. Rose was glad to have such a turn of events in her life. What are we going to eat? He asked her. I'll make something. She got up and went to the refrigerator. She felt so comfortable here. Not like in this cramped apartment. She pulled out the groceries and started cooking. While she was doing that, Caleb was off somewhere. He arrived with flowers and champagne. "We should celebrate your first day at my place," he pointed to the bottle. "Yeah, okay," she laughed. Dinner was prepared and they sat down at the table. Caleb poured champagne into glasses. "To our long and happy life," he looked at her. "To us," Rose repeated and took a sip. The champagne was cold, the bubbles tickling her tongue. It felt so good. The next day, Rose did nothing but dress and cook. A woman who had done it here before came to clean. Rose liked to go out on the veranda and just sit there. "Take some money, you can go to the barbershop," Caleb told her. "Thanks, honey." Rose wished she'd done that earlier with Nate. "Nothing would be spared for you," he kissed her shoulder. All day long the man was missing somewhere, and in the evening again it was necessary to sew someone or take out bullets. But Rose didn't say anything. It was her job, and it paid well. "Listen, I've got an idea." Caleb held up a finger. "What was it?" Rose smiled. "Let's open a private clinic, and you'll be in charge." He looked at her. "Why not? We could kill two birds with one stone. I won't have to treat your patients on Christopher anymore, and ordinary people will be able to visit it," she explained. Indeed, he stopped talking and thought about something. "What are you thinking about?" Rose asked him. "Where to get a building so that it wouldn't be too far from the center." He was burning with the idea. "I don't even know." Rose never touched on such a thing at all. "Okay, we'll figure something out," he promised her. After that conversation, Caleb had indeed instructed his people to find out everything about the buildings in the center, where they could open a new institution. Rose advised that in the meantime, she should remember the professionals who would be working with her. She started calling the girls who had once studied with her. A couple of them were just looking for a job, and she invited them, of course, when everything was ready. They said yes right away. "I found the right building. Now I need you to look at everything there and tell me how, what, and where it should be." Caleb spoke to her in a businesslike manner. He liked this girl because of the fact that she could do a lot of things, including pulling anyone from the other side of the world. "Okay, when do we go?" she asked. "We can go right tomorrow," he shrugged. Rose thought tonight that if Nate found out about this, he'd be jealous. After all, he had a daddy and a mommy that everyone knew. So let him sit in a free clinic while she opened her own. "Let's go to bed," Caleb urged her. They went upstairs. Rose was happy with everything in her life right now. There was one more thing she had to do, of course, and that was file the divorce papers. But she didn't think that would be a problem. "Are you ready?" her roommate asked. "Of course, I'm always ready," she came out to him. "What a beauty you are." He could not admire her. They got into the car and drove to where the future clinic was to be. Rose looked out the window, and there were people walking along the sidewalks with nothing in their bags. Everyone was dressed strangely. She looked at Caleb and smiled. "What?" he asked. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" He didn't understand. "For the fact that you were shot, that I was the one on duty that night, and I never would have met you otherwise." She put her hand on his knee. "Stupid," he laughed. He often used insulting words with her, but Rose paid no attention to them. She was happy. "Here we are." They stopped in front of the building. "The location is good." The woman looked around. "Picked it myself," Caleb said proudly. They went inside. There was nothing there. It needed a major renovation. Rose and Caleb walked down the hallways, looking in the offices, while she described what and where to put and place. "I think that's it." She was so tired she wanted to just sit down, but there were no chairs or anything. "That's it. Then I'll get the workers here tomorrow," the man who wanted to make her happy told her. "Good," she smiled. They drove to the house. There was standing there. "Who?" the man asked him. Stone, he called the nickname of one of the accomplices. "How?" Caleb communicated briefly. Bullet Joshua opened the car doors. Get him in the house. He turned to Rose, who understood. She was a filigree at her job, able to deal with any illness or injury. And now she was working on a man she didn't know. The bullet entered the lung, fluid and air started to build up. "You're going to have to go to the hospital," she was afraid. "No hospitals, haven't you learned that yet?" Caleb raised his voice at her. Rose cried, hurt and scared. Stone had died right in Caleb's house. She went out into the hall. "What's in there?" Caleb asked her. "He's dead," the woman wiped away her tears. "How could this happen?" He started pacing back and forth. "I don't know. I told you we'd have to go to the hospital and doctors." She didn't finish. She walked over to Caleb and leaned into his shoulder. "Okay, it's okay." He realized she was having a hard time too. Joshua was carrying Stone's body out, and Rose guessed that it wasn't the first time because the work was smooth. "What's going to happen now?" She looked at the man. "Nothing. You don't need to know about that." He hugged her. Rose realized that all of this had to do with crime, but she loved being with Caleb. Sometimes he could say things that made her feel scared, and then he'd go back to being the good Caleb she'd come to love. Nate and Christopher's 2 days turned into 4. Caroline, when she found out what Rose had done, didn't judge her because there was nothing she could do about it. "Did you catch a lot of fish?" she asked her son and his friend when they returned from fishing. Here Nate showed her the bucket. "There's enough to fry." The woman was happy. Nate realized that this trip really took his mind off his sad thoughts. His mother supported him, his friend encouraged him. "Maybe you need help around the house." The son hoped his mother would keep them busy with work. She understood that. She showed the buildings in the yard that needed attention. That's what the men did. When they left, everything was done to the best of their ability. "Come back. If it gets bad," her mother hugged Nate. "I will." He knew he would feel better here. Nate went back to work. He was still hoping for something because Rose hadn't filed for divorce. Nate Millie came up to him. She worked at the hospital as a nurse. He turned to her. "How are you doing?" "I just came over to ask and be supportive," the girl said. "I'm fine," he said half-truthfully. "I know your wife left you here. I brought some sandwiches." She handed him a bunch. "Thank you, let's go and have tea together," he called out to the girl. "Let's go." She looked at the end of the corridor. They sat, drinking tea, eating sandwiches and talking. Nate realized that during this, he never once thought about Rose. "What, did you find a new girl yet?" Nate walked in on him. "It's Millie. She made me sandwiches," he smiled. "Yeah, I know those sandwiches," Christopher laughed. "Okay, don't get too excited, or the rumors will spread around the hospital again." Nate came up to him and said quietly. "Are you saying that I'm the one spreading them?" Nate asked. "Calm down. I didn't say anything." The man smiled. "What are you going to do?" His friend was looking at him, and it was obvious that he was going to suggest something. "I haven't made any plans yet," Nate said honestly. "How about me and my wife, and you and Millie go out?" he suggested to distract his friend. "I don't know." Nate didn't want to go out with anyone. "Come on, you'll get your mind off it," Christopher urged. "Then we should get out in nature," he said. "Did you know that Rose was opening a clinic?" Christopher asked. "What clinic?" That question interested Nate more than any other. "The usual one, the guy who's building it for her." Christopher looked at his friend. "Wow, she got what she wanted," the man concluded. He wasn't envious or resentful, just happy for his wife. Rose was talking to Caleb about filing the divorce papers. "You're right. Let's go," he nodded at the car. They'd come to the registry office. They needed Nate to come too. "Are you coming?" Rose looked at Caleb, afraid he was going to get angry. "I will," he nodded. They drove to the house, but Nate wasn't there, so they drove to the hospital, where they found him. She was walking down the hall toward him. Nate looked at this young, slender, beautiful woman and couldn't believe his eyes. "I need you to get a divorce," she told him without greeting. Okay, he took off his robe and followed her. The man got into the car. It turned out to be an uncomfortable situation. "Hello," Nate said, and he wanted to get at the throat of this divorce. "Hi," Caleb wheezed. They drove off, and in a few minutes they were there. The couple was asked if they were both in agreement, and when the answers were given, the registry clerk gave them a certificate of dissolution. "That's it for now. Hopefully we'll never meet again," Rose waved her hand at him. Bye, he tilted his head and walked towards the hospital. No one was going to lead him back. "Where have you been?" his friend asked when he got back. Nate just pulled out and put the certificate on the table. Wow, his friend pressed his lips together and looked at the letters. "That's how quickly and easily a few years of your life are crossed out," the man said sadly. "Come on, everything that is done is for the best," said his friend. They went on with their work. On the weekend, Christopher called and reminded about the trip to the countryside. Nate agreed. He couldn't sit in his apartment. Everything reminded him of her. "Are you going to call Millie or should I?" Christopher asked. "You'd better do it, because I feel uncomfortable," Nate asked his friend. "Okay, what time do we leave?" he asked another question. Even now, Nate's main thing was to get out of the house. He relied on his friend, so he didn't worry about anything. The man began to pack a backpack. He knew what he might need. Right now, Nate was thinking about Millie. She's so young, it was even scary to start any kind of relationship with her. They met outside the hospital. Millie was looking at everyone and didn't understand what was going on. "Are you glad you're coming with us?" Christopher asked her. "Of course, I realize that Nate needs our help," she looked at him. "Stop calling me that already. I feel like I'm old," he asked Millie. "Okay," Nate the girl smiled. They drove a short distance out of town. There, the men immediately built a fire and the women started cooking. "Friend, I want you to come to your senses. There are a lot of people around who love and appreciate you," he said to Nate. "Thank you for always being there for me," he thanked them. The renovation of the building was in full swing. The walls were already painted, and some furniture was being purchased. Rose was pleased with what was happening. "Will you marry me?" Caleb asked her as he walked by. What did you say?" She ran after him. "What did you hear?" He turned and smiled. "About getting married," she blushed. "Will you get married or not?" He waited for an answer. "Of course, because I love you." She hugged her future husband by the neck. He took something small out of his pocket. Rose looked at it. It was a ring with a stone. "Caleb, you're so thoughtful," she put the jewelry on his finger. "I really care about you." He pulled her close with one hand and kissed her. "How are we going to handle everything, with the clinic here and the wedding there?" She was confused. "Don't worry, there's only supervision. Specially trained people will do the rest." They walked out of the building. Rose was the happiest. She had picked out the dress she wanted to wear for her wedding in a magazine. The material had been bought, a seamstress had been found. All that was left was to sew it. The bride did everything herself, choosing jewelry, shoes, watching the sewing. On the day, which was the most important for her, everything was beautiful. All of Caleb's friends came. The motorcade was long. In the registry office, everything went quickly. Then a long ride, honking signals. Ahead was the restaurant. Bitterly shouted the guests. And Caleb and Rose kissed relentlessly. "That's it. You're busted," her husband told her when they got home. "Busted where?" she wondered. "In my net," Caleb laughed. "I'm glad to be in them," she was honest with him. "Caleb," they heard Joshua's voice. "What is it now?" He walked out of the room and started downstairs. There was a man standing in the hallway holding his stomach, blood visible between his fingers. "What happened?" the man asked his friend. They were waiting for you. Because as soon as I put your machine down, they just ran up and stabbed you. Do you realize that it should have been you in my place?" He started to lose consciousness. Oh man. Caleb was getting angry on my wedding day. He looked up and Rose was standing on the stairs, and she realized it and went to change. "Hurry up," he shouted to her. He himself picked Joshua up and put him on the couch. Rose could see that no one had done anything on purpose. It was a simple stabbing, like a warning that it could be worse. "That's it," the woman finished. "Will it live?" Caleb wondered. "If the body is strong, it can handle it," she said, and went to the bathroom. She'd sewn and restitched so many of them, but she never knew where and when they got those wounds. "Come on, I'll lay you down," Caleb called out to her. "No, go sit with Joshua. He might wake up. Put some water on his lips," she advised her husband. Joshua was lying in the designated room, an IV in his hand. "Freaks," Caleb said again. He knew the competition wouldn't leave him alone, and he had to do something. He came into the bedroom. Rose was already asleep, and the man undressed and lay down next to her. "Nate, would you like some tea?" Millie asked him. "Thank you, I wouldn't say no." He looked gratefully at the girl. "Shall we go to the movies tonight?" he asked her. "Sure. Is this a date invitation?" Millie asked. Let it be so. Nate had been alone for so long that he just missed communication and a woman's caress. "I've wanted it for so long. You're a wonderful man. You do such a good deed. You help people, and she's like this with you." Millie sat down closer to him. "Don't talk about it," he asked her. They finished their work and went, as Nate had promised, to the movie theater. There he bought tickets for himself and her, and they walked into the darkness of the hall. "Do you think it's interesting?" Millie nodded at the screen. Definitely, he was sure of it. As the movie went on, at some point Nate felt Millie's hand in his, and he took it in his, seeing the way she looked at him out of the corner of his eye. "Look how much love they have," Millie sobbed over another scene in the movie. Yeah, Nate thought at that moment. Rose never cried. She took everything in an arrogant way. He liked Millie, and he was even ready to start dating her, but he didn't know how she would react. "Millie, this is for you." He walked out of the movie theater and bought one flower from the woman who was selling them. "Thank you." She took it and smelled it. "Shall we be friends?" he asked her. "Friends?" She looked at the man with regret. "It's just that I was afraid to offer something more." He was embarrassed. "You're so big and you're still shy," she smiled. "I'm just embarrassed. You're so young after all," he told her. "What are you, silly? I've liked you for a long time, and when Rose left you, I thought I had a chance," she said quickly. "Millie, you're so good," he pulled her against him. "And you..." She was pleased. From that moment on, Nate and Millie started dating. His friends and his mother were happy for him. "Bring him over to meet her," Caroline told him over the phone. "I will. We'll just do a little work," he told his mother. Millie turned out to be very nice indeed. She was a great hostess, cooked so much that Nate couldn't tear himself away. She did everything in the apartment, went through old books, alphabetized them. Everything fell into place. "Really, how do you make everything fit so well?" Nate realized he had the wrong woman in his life. And now he had exactly what he needed. They were starting a life together. "Caleb, are you in trouble?" Rose asked her husband. "It's none of your business." He stared at the wall, probably thinking about something. "I need to know what's wrong with my husband." She moved to be in his field of vision. "Shut up, please," Caleb said, albeit with a polite word, but very rudely. It offended Rose, but she couldn't do anything about it. "How are you doing without Joshua now?" she asked. "I'm wondering." He scratched his head. Just recently, the firm Caleb ran had done a big deal. But there were a few things going on. The documents that had been prepared had been tweaked a little. The competitors who had their sights set on the deal couldn't believe they'd lost. They warned Caleb that if he didn't come clean about the forgery, they would do everything they could to make it happen. When Joshua and Stone were there, you could hope for some safety, but now he's all alone. There are sixes, but they're no help. "I'm going to work," he said to Rose. "Can I go to the clinic and supervise everything there?" she asked him. They were nearing the end of their work, and they could open in a couple months. Sure, Caleb didn't mind. "Nate, why don't you and I apply, after all these years together?" Millie asked him in bed that evening. "Why not?" he smiled, thinking to himself that the saying about things working out for the best was right. If Rose hadn't left him then, he wouldn't have met Millie. "Tomorrow, then?" She lay on his chest. Yes, he stroked her hair. Because of Caleb's problems, the clinic had to be frozen for a couple of years, and now, after a good deal, everything was back on track. Rose was here, watching everything. She knew that once it was up and running, there would be no shortage of clients. "Why haven't you done anything here?" She pointed to the corner of one of the offices. "There will be some big machine there." The workers answered her. "So what?" "That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it," she said sternly, as if she was imitating Caleb. "Okay, it will be done," the workers told her. She walked around looking at her future brainchild. Millie and Nate applied at the registry office. They were both happy. Millie said she already had her wedding dress. "Did you prepare for everything in advance?" Nate wondered. "No, when I was a little girl, I used to visit my grandmother. I found this beautiful dress in her trunk, and she said it was her wedding dress. Then I promised her that I would get married in it too," the girl said. "That's a great idea," Nate kissed her. They were getting ready to make sure everything went well. Christopher and his wife were helping them. They did their best for their friends because they loved them. The hospital was happy about the news too. "Nate, you can use the cafeteria building," the man in charge suggested to him. "No thanks, we're in the cafeteria," Nate told him. "As you like. It's my business to offer." The chief shook his hand. Almost everything was ready. All that was left was to wait for this day. "I love you, and I'm happy around a man like you," Millie told him. "And I love you," he kissed her. Things were getting worse for Caleb. Joshua couldn't recover from the knife wound. "I have to leave," he said to Rose. "Be careful," she asked him. "I will. Sandra and Donnie are with me," he told his wife, kissed her, and went outside. Rose had some bad vibes. She sat at home and waited every minute for Caleb to walk through the door. But it didn't happen until very late in the evening. She didn't go to bed because her husband never stayed anywhere. Even though at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, he still came home. Rose, Caleb's hurt. Alex came running into the house. "Where is he?" She knew it, tears streaming from her eyes, everyone fussing. Caleb was carried into the house. Rose examined him. She pulled out all the tools, tried to do something. There was not one bullet, but two. She got one out with no problem, but the second one was a problem. Caleb wouldn't come to. It was like he wasn't even alive anymore. "Be patient. Love," she whispered to him. "Danny, we need to go to the hospital," she yelled. "What hospital? You can't go there," he said. "I'm telling you, we have to go." She was already screaming like a hysterical woman. Okay, the boy agreed. They loaded Caleb into the car. Rose said the address, and they drove off. "Just don't die," she whispered to her husband and cried. She was taking him to Nate. He was the only one who could help her now. She'd thought that after what she'd said to him the last time, he wouldn't do anything. But she had one last chance. The car stopped. She got out and ran into the hospital. "Where's Nate?" she screamed. "He's not here. He has a wedding tomorrow," the girl said. What wedding?" She was distracted for a moment. The usual, the girl shrugged. Rose pushed her away, started dialing the phone number. She looked at the clock, realizing it was late, but she had no choice. It took a long time, but the phone was picked up. "Hello," Millie said in a sleepy voice. "Nate for me," Rose said. "Who's asking for him?" Rose wondered. "My ex-wife," she said. "Why do you want him?" Millie shuddered. "Give me Nate, and then we'll talk," shouted Rose. "Hello," he answered the phone. "Nate, I really need your help. I'm at the hospital waiting for you," she hung up. "You're not going anywhere," Millie told him. "I'm sorry, but I took the Hippocratic oath." He pushed his fiancée away and started to get dressed. "What about our wedding?" she cried. "It's going to be okay," he kissed her and started downstairs. "Hey man, are you Nate?" a young man shouted to him from the car. "Yeah," he nodded. "Get in. I'll give you a ride," the driver said. Nate didn't hesitate as he drove to the hospital, wondering what could have happened to Rose that she dared to call him. What if she'd been hurt, or worse? They stopped at the entrance. The man ran up the steps. He saw no one, went to the second floor where the operating room was. On the way, he changed his clothes. "Where is my ex-wife?" he asked the nurse in the hallway. She shrugged. She was young and new to the job. "Nate, to the OR," his assistant said. Right away he nodded and went that way. When the man ran into the operating room, washed his hands and put on a mask, he came to the table and was stunned. On the table lay the same oligarch who had stolen his wife from him a few years ago. Nate froze. "He doesn't have much left. A lot of blood loss," he heard voices, as if in a fog. "Yes." Now the male doctor couldn't adjust. He brought the scalpel in, looked once more into the face of the man he hated so much, made the incision. Everyone worked in unison. Nate saw what the problem was and why Rose couldn't do it on her own, and began to conjure. "Blood," the nurse shouted and started applying swabs. Nate clamped the artery. He couldn't concentrate. His hands were shaking. "Are you all right?" they asked him. Yes, his eyes were rippling with tears. He remembered everything that had happened in his life. Those who had worked at the hospital when Rose had left understood who it was and why the always calm surgeon was acting like this now. "You can't delay unless you want him to not die right here," the female anesthesiologist told him. "I totally understand." The doctor started to get angry. He refocused. The surgery continued. There was some delicate work to be done, stitching everything together so that the blood loss would stop. The operation lasted about 5 hours. Everyone was very tired, but when it was over, it was as if the strength had reappeared. Nate sank to the floor, right there in the room. Millie was waiting for him at home. She was awake, even though she realized she wouldn't look good tomorrow. She was worried about where Rose had summoned her fiancé to. "He's getting worse," the nurse shouted. "He's lost a lot of blood," Nate said. "What to do?" "We need to call the main one to bring him in," she mumbled. "No need. Take mine if it fits." Nate was already ready to do anything to save this man. "What do you need that for?" Nate entered. "It's a man." Nate raised his eyes to him. "So what? Remember how much this man has done bad things to you." Nate spoke with hatred. "Let them go and bring blood." No, Nate was very tired. Nate turned out to have the right blood type. When it was done, they moved Caleb to the ICU and Nate slept right there, where he donated blood. Rose sat in the hallway. She was in complete ignorance of what was going on. She ran up to every doctor that walked down the hallway. Suddenly she saw Nate. "Christopher, wait," she ran up to him. "What do you want from me?" he asked sternly. "Kiryuka Badabum, 18.05.2024-031. Tell me, how's it going in there?" She looked toward the end of the hallway. "Everything is fine, but how dare you do that? He's getting married tomorrow. He's finally found the one person who will be with him forever. And then you and Caleb show up again." He could have talked for a long time, but Rose fainted. "What's wrong with you?" He picked her up. After that, the ammonia was brought in, and the woman regained consciousness. "Christopher, I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to turn, she cried. We need to report the gunshot, the man told her. Don't. It'll be okay, she pleaded. Where's Nate? I need to talk to him. Why is it that when he asked you to talk, you just turned around and walked away? He didn't want to talk to her anymore. Please, she asked over and over again. He's in surgery, Nate said, and walked down the hallway away from her. Nate Rose walked in there. He was lying there with his eyes closed. By everything and the way the place stood, Rose realized everything. She picked up a chair, placed it near her ex-husband, and took his hand. At that moment, Nate opened his eyes. Thank you, she told him. I didn't do it for you, but because I had to. I promised to help people, and he's human, Nate said calmly and quietly. He looked at her and wondered why he had been so hurt back then. Just an ordinary greedy woman who would do anything when she needed to. Still, thank you, the other would have just left her to die to get revenge, she cried. What are you saying? I would never do such a thing, he pulled his hand away. Where is he now? Rose asked. You don't know where they take people after surgery, or have you forgotten, used to chopping them up on the kitchen table? Nate spoke as if he were spitting out the words, uncomfortable. He started to get up, feeling a little dizzy. The man looked at his watch. It was only a few hours until his wedding. He remembered Millie. His heart started to beat faster. He didn't even look at Rose. Thank you, she said with just her lips. Nate was in a hurry. He didn't want to make Maria nervous. What are you doing sitting here? He entered the apartment, and she was in the hallway. Waiting for you. She stood up, cried, and hugged him. Go, you need some sleep. He nudged her towards the room. Are you with me? She couldn't calm down. Maybe it was the excitement before the wedding. Of course, he pulled her against him, and they lay down on the bed together. What did she want from you? Millie asked him. Her husband was wounded. She couldn't save him herself. Nate was telling the truth. She didn't do without you in this life after all, the girl said with some contempt. Don't be angry. It's a bad feeling, her fiancé told her. Did you save him? She raised her head and looked at her beloved. Of course, I could not do otherwise. He kissed her. They lay there for a while longer, and then sleep washed over them. Millie woke up to a ray of sunlight shining in her face. Nate, what time is it? She screamed. What? He couldn't get out of the dream. His whole body was tired. We have an hour left. She was running around the apartment. Wait, calm down. We'll make it, he hugged her. Okay, she exhaled and went to the bathroom. Her eyes were swollen after yesterday. She tried to do something, but everything was in vain, so she put on makeup. After that, she put on her dress, shoes, and veil. I'm ready, she called out from the room. She and Nate had agreed that instead of ransom, he would take her out of the room. He walked over, opened the doors, admired Millie. She looked like a porcelain doll in that vintage dress. You're beautiful, he approached her. Thank you, we're late, the girl reminded him. They came out of the entrance. Several decorated cars were parked near it. Nate, the same guy who drove him yesterday, came out of the salon. What else? He asked irritably. Let's go. This is your motorcade. The guy pointed at the other two cars. Kiryukabatabum, 18.05.2024-031. Shall we go? She looked at Millie. Of course, what to refuse if offered? She was glad. This way they would definitely not be late. The young people got into their cars and drove off. People were already waiting at the registry office, all beautifully dressed. Wow, Christopher looked at the cars. A gift from the rescuer, Nate commented. It makes sense now, Nate nodded. They went inside. Everything was solemn there. After the rings were on hand, all the guests got into the cars and went for a ride. I love you, Millie leaned over to her husband. And I love you, he echoed her. They were so happy that they had already forgotten what had happened yesterday. They arrived at the restaurant in the evening. Everything was ready. Nate noticed that on the tables, in addition to what they had ordered, there were gourmet dishes. He realized that Rose had done it. Well, let the guests enjoy themselves. He didn't say anything to Millie. They sat at the head of the table, looking at those who came to congratulate them. It was so nice. At some point, Rose came in. "What are you doing here?" Nate got up from his seat. He knew Millie wouldn't like it. "Wait, I'll leave now. I have a surprise for you," she said. After saying that, Nate's mom walked into the room. "Mom, hi," he walked up to her. "Thanks," Rose said, and walked away from them. "How are you doing here?" Nate asked her. "Rose came over, said she wanted to bring me here. Daddy's gone and I didn't say no," Mom said and cried. "Thank her for that," the son mumbled, walking his mother to the table. Millie smiled at the woman. She too found Rose's act a pleasant surprise. The guests partied, and the young ones just enjoyed each other. Rose sat by the emergency room. No one allowed her to go in there. But by evening she managed to persuade the doctors and nurses to let her talk to her beloved. She entered the room and immediately went over to Caleb and took his hand. It was as if he had lost weight overnight. "Beloved, come to your senses," she told him. She knew he could hear her, but somewhere far away. She just sat next to him and prayed. On the third day, Caleb came to his senses. "Are you okay?" She saw that he stirred and opened his eyes. He wrinkled his nose. "It's going to be okay." Rose went out into the hallway and called the doctor. After that, he was moved to the ICU. Rose did not leave the man's side. "Thank you," he told her, "but why am I in the hospital?" "I had to, otherwise you would have died," she confessed to him. "That's not good," he told her. "Do you know who helped you?" She looked at him and waited to see what he would say. "Of course not. Thought it was you," he glared. "Nate, my ex-husband," she took her eyes aside. "And you didn't even let me die," he smirked. "Even more, you lost a lot of blood. He gave you his," Rose said. "Good man, you picked yourself," he said. "I was sure he would help," the woman said, and hugged her husband. "It's good that everything ends well," he told her. As she led him down the hall, she could feel how much she cared for this man, how much she was willing to do for him. "I need to go home because they will find me here quickly," he mumbled. "Okay, who do you want me to call?" Rose asked. "I don't know who to call." "Like Joshua?" he asked. "He's withdrawing, but he's still weak," Rose thought. To who? She had to go down to the first floor to make the call. She ran and called the guys to help get Caleb out and get him home. "What's up with the clinic?" Caleb asked, already at home. "It's fine. The work is almost done," she thought. Even sick, he cares about her problems. They had put in a requisition for the equipment. Everything should be arriving soon. "Make the order double," Caleb asked Rose. "Why?" She turned to him. "For the hospital where your ex-husband works," he mumbled. "What, you're going to buy him expensive equipment?" Rose resented him. She wanted it only in her clinic. Kiryuka Badabum, 18.05.2024-031. "Didn't you want your husband to stay with you?" He asked her a counter question. "Of course I did." She almost cried. "The man suppressed all the hatred and anger in him and saved me." Caleb was fair. They sat and were silent. Nate was at work. It had been a month and a half since the wedding. "Nate, the equipment is here for you," the girl at the front desk said to him. What equipment?" He was on his way down. "I don't know," she shrugged. Nate went downstairs, saw the machine and various hospital equipment that the hospital would never buy. He stood there not realizing what was wrong. Nate, the same driver guy, called out to him. "Oh, it's you." He recognized him. "This is for you from Caleb," he said. "Wow." This is expensive. Nate looked at everything. They started bringing everything inside. The head doctor came down. What's going on here? No one in the hospital understood what it all meant. It's for charity, Nate said. He was already imagining how they could help people with all this equipment. And this is all your fault? The man came up to him. I had nothing to do with it. He did it on his own. He just liked the treatment with us, the man said. Yes, of course, pretended to believe him the supervisor. Nate returned home. He told Millie about everything. She was very surprised by the event. Caroline was still living at her son's house. Millie didn't mind it one bit. She was going to move on. Caroline was telling her everything and showing her in practice. Oh, Mom, you're so nice. The girl hugged her. So are you. She liked her. They were sitting and talking when suddenly Millie felt sick. She ran to the bathroom and after a long apologized to her mother-in-law. Millie, so you're pregnant? The woman laughed. It can't be. Nate told me he's not having kids. She looked at the woman with big eyes. I'm telling you with 100% certainty that he is. The woman was certain. Millie, just to be sure, made an appointment with the doctor, and there she was confirmed that the baby was in fact coming. Nate, I'm pregnant. She walked in on him. This can't be happening, he exclaimed to the entire hospital. I told your mom the same thing. She laughed. Caroline decided to stay until her daughter-in-law gave birth and then help. The children agreed. Rose finally opened her clinic. She had a lot of work to do now, trying to get things set up so that people were comfortable and convenient. When she found out Millie was pregnant, she called her to meet. Rose wants me to go to a meeting, she told Nate that evening. Go see if she has anything good to say, he said. Millie went to the clinic the next day to see Rose. She was escorted into her office. Hello, she entered modestly. Come in. And don't be shy. I'm being kind. Rose smiled. Millie walked through, took a seat. I want to offer you to give birth in my clinic. There are good specialists here, and the equipment, Rose offered. Why so noble? Millie began. Don't be like that. It's just a kind gesture. Rose reached out and touched Millie's arm. Okay, I'll think about it. She stood up. Millie came home and told Nate everything, and Rose, in turn, did the same at home. She was so grateful to Nate for what he had done. Why don't we adopt a baby? Caleb said to her one day. You think we could do that? She told him. We'll get a nanny if it's hard for you, he promised her. Okay, let's go and see. Rose agreed. They came to the orphanage to look out for someone who needed them. Rose saw the boy at first sight, who looked a lot like Caleb. Hi, she leaned over to him. Mom, he told her and smiled. After that, no one thought anything more. They found out what documents were needed and started to prepare them. Not 3 months later, Pete was already at their house. Nate, we want to invite you and Millie to our son's birthday party, Rose called them. What son? He was stunned. Mine, she said calmly. Okay, if Millie agrees, we'll definitely come, he said and hung up. Kiryuka Badabum, 18.05.2024-031. Why are you looking like that? His wife asked him. Rose called. She's inviting me to her son's birthday party, he said. What son? Millie asked him the same thing. I don't know either. He was still in shock. It's good if it works out that way. You saved her husband's life. You gave him your blood. Your brother, she said judiciously. And you're going to give birth in her clinic. Shall we go? He looked at his wife, who had gotten a little fat, but it only made her prettier. They came. They were led into the gate, then into the house. Hi, the boy ran out to them. Caleb, he looks remarkably like you, Millie remarked. That's because he's my son, he said, stepping out and shaking Nate's hand. After that, everyone sat down together at the table. It was nice to see such warm company. "I hope no one is angry with anyone," Nate asked. "That question should be asked to you. You're the one who got hurt here," Rose told him. They sat and talked. At the end of the evening, they agreed that they would talk together. After that, Rose called Millie often to see how she was doing. Maria was admitted to hospital a week before the birth to be on the safe side, but there was no need to do that. Everything started on time and went very well. An adorable little girl was born, who was named Irina. By now, Nate, Caroline, and Millie had invited Caleb and Rose over. "Why don't we do it at our place, outdoors?" Caleb suggested. "What's there to do out there?" Rose thought that he'd hurt Nate's feelings, but he gladly agreed. Everyone sat around the table, and little Arisha slept in the stroller. It was so cute to see little Pete driving the stroller around the yard, and he could barely reach the handle.